I'm going to show you how to do color charts. You'll be doing a number of color charts throughout the remainder of the semester, and they're all done in a similar manner, although using different formulas. So you're going to start today with your carbon black and titanium white. We're going to do the achromatic color chart. Achromatic meaning black, white, and gray. It lacks any hue or color. I have my 1/2-inch brush. You do need a 1/2-inch brush. That is what is efficient for doing the color charts. And I have a couple containers. One is a 1 ounce and one is a 3/4 ounce. I'm going to use the 3/4 ounce today. And the first thing that you want to do is you want to very lightly shake your paints, not rigorously, just very lightly, and you want to let them settle for a moment. And I'm going to start with the black. Now we are going to be adding the light to the dark. Adding light to dark produces a much more subtle change, and that's what we want. I'm adding 9 drops of black. Don't worry about whether or not your drops are perfectly even. Everyone does this differently, and the paint flows differently depending on a lot of variables, including heat, cold, in other words, room temperature. And I got 3 drops of white to start. Now, to mix, I'm going to do this very gently. I just want to gently and thoroughly mix my paint. And notice that I'm keeping it off to one side of the container. And the reason I'm doing that is because if you spread this out too much, it's going to dry against the plastic and you'll run out of paint. So you want to have kind of a pool of color. And once I have it mixed, I want to take off any excess paint. You do not want a thick coat of paint. You don't want any texture. We are looking to just merely cover the paper. And make sure you take it off of the sides too. If you bear down on your brush, it'll squeeze that paint right out the sides and you'll get streaks. And I'm going to start in the upper left, and all I want to do is cover the square. Now, don't paint in the square. You want to go outside of the square. Much more efficient, much faster. And you're going to be cutting these later, so you don't really need to worry about it being perfectly inside of the square. Once I've painted that, I'm going to add 3 more drops. Oh, that was 4. Don't worry about it. It's not an exact science. It happens. And again, I'm going to mix that. Now, the achromatic chart is the longest of the charts because we are going from near black to near white. And it'll take you anywhere from 1 to 3 sheets of Bristol board to do it. Now, everyone paints differently. So if you end up getting 2.5, 3 pages, don't worry about it. You're not doing it wrong. It just has to do with how you paint and how much paint you drop into each square, how large your drops are. There's just a lot of variables, and everyone does it a little bit differently. And you want to work fairly quickly. You don't want it to dry while you're working. You don't want to overwork it, or you get something that's called drag, meaning it's partly dry, and you're going to drag the paint around and create a texture. We don't want any texture here, so we don't want any thick paint. We don't want any drag. And I'm going to continue doing this until I get to a near white. Now, the reason we're doing color charts like this incrementally is so that you train your eye to see changes, small changes of color. And it's really helpful when you are working on any project, whether it's painting, graphic design, and you need to adjust color to know how far to move it, to be able to eyeball that and know exactly how far you need to move a value or a color to make your project work. Now, I would guesstimate, since this is the first time you're doing these charts, that it might take you a couple hours. I can actually sit down and do an entire achromatic chart in an hour and a half. It's a little slower when I'm doing a demo and talking. But if you just sit down and do it, it should take you maybe 2 hours at the most. If you do need to stop, you can just close your container and get back to it later. Okay. I think that's a little too much paint on there. Yikes. That's a lot too much paint on there. So I'm going to take it off, take the excess off my brush, and I'm going to use the tip of my brush to pick up some of this paint and to push the excess outside of the main area that I want to be smooth. There we go. Much better. You're going to notice a difference in the flow of paint probably from day to day. The white is very loose. My black wasn't very loose, but my white is very loose. Be patient with this, and keep in mind that on your first chart, you may need to start over. You may need to practice. So it's a good idea to practice your painting before you even start it on just another sheet of Bristol board so that you get the technique down. And you'll begin to see very small changes in the value. There'll be places on your chart where it'll seem like it's not changing at all, and then it'll suddenly seem to jump, and it'll seem like a large change. Now, as you get towards the lighter end of your chart, it'll change less. And what you can do about that is, if you have too much paint, there's a couple things that you can do to kind of jumpstart it again. If you have a lot of paint in your jar, and some of you will, some of you won't, some of you will keep a small amount, but some of you will build up a lot of paint. You can pour a little bit of it off into another container. Hang on to it, reserve it. You'll want it for your practicals, for your color practicals. You can reuse it. You can also try washing your brush, taking any excess paint out of your brush. Or you can try adding an extra drop or two, and that'll kind of jumpstart it. At this point of the chart, in the darker values, you don't want to do that. But as you get towards the lighter values, you may need to do that. If you make a mistake on a square, don't worry about it. Just move on. So you could see that I got some paint in this square here that I don't want there. Now, if I was painting lightly, it would show through, but I'm going to go ahead and paint this, and hopefully it'll cover and be an even cover. Yes, that worked. If you drip paint into one of your squares or on your paper, don't worry about it. You know, let the square dry and just move on. You just won't use that square when you make your color scales. So check the handout. There is a photo of a completed achromatic chart so that you can see the entire range that you'll need. I'm not going to paint the whole chart. You don't want to watch a 2-hour video of paint drying, I'm sure. But I am going to go to the end of this row. So that you can see some changes. Again, the reason I'm adding the light to the dark rather than the other way around is so that you get a gradual shift in value and you have enough values to choose from to do your scale, your value scales and your color scales, and to train your eye. My paint's a bit loose, a little bit runny today, actually. So I'm going to use the tip of my brush to pull off the excess again. Now, when doing all of your charts, good craftsmanship is important, especially in color. Can't really erase the paint. And on the charts, you can't paint over another value. It'll just throw things off. So again, if you make a mistake, just let it dry, exit out, and move on. It's not that critical. I'm just going to go to the end of this row and show you how to continue. Acrylic dries pretty quickly. If you haven't worked with it before, it will dry fairly quickly. If it's not thick, it'll be dry, within 10 minutes if it's not thick. Now, I prefer to give it an extra 10 or so if you're going to put it away. And you want to store your paper and your charts flat. Keep them clean. Now, when I get to the end of the row, I know the tendency would be to go back left on the second row, but you don't want to do that here. Hopefully now you can see some changes in the value from where we started. I'm going to drop down to the next row. I'm not going to go back left. I'm going to just drop straight down. And continue left. And the reason I'm doing it this way is that when you do your color charts, or not your charts, your scales, it's a much smoother visual transition rather than going to all the way to the right and back in the way that you would read. And that can make a difference in color because when your eyes go back and you're scanning the entire chart and your retina will pick up some of the other values. It's not a real big deal, but this is very helpful. And I'm going to continue on back left, and when I get to the end of the row here, I'm going to drop down this way and come back around and then drop down at this end and come back around. You might find it helpful to draw rulers so that you don't lose your place. If you do happen to get to the end of the row and go back to the left again on a row, don't worry about it. Again, you're going to be painting a lot of squares, and it's not an exact science, and you don't need to be concerned about it. I'm going to reserve my paint when I'm finished and save it for mixing for color practicals. And you want to make sure when you're finished that you also rinse your brush real well and wash it real well. I like the brush cleaner. You can use any soap, a little bit of dishwashing liquid or a bar soap, and make sure that you rinse it well. Make sure you run the soap through. Normally I do this at a sink, but I'm in my studio, so I don't have a sink right in front of me. But you want to get the brush cleaner on it and work it all the way through. Don't bend the bristles back. You want to go forward. And then you're going to rinse it in the sink, obviously, not in a bowl. And I like to repeat it. You can see that I still have a little bit of color coming out of it. So I'm going to repeat the process again. And run it under water. Make sure you get the paint, dried paint, off of this area is called a ferrule. Make sure you get your dried paint out of that. And if you're using the nylon bristles, they are going to stain. Don't worry about it. Doesn't mean they're dirty. It just means that the nylon picks up the pigment. And you want to blot it dry, lay it flat to dry, and you're set to go for the next session or the next chart.